February 1st, 1959, 9 experienced hikers began what should have been a routine expedition across the northern Urals. Their destination was Mount Otorten, a peak whose name translates to "Don't go there" in the local Mansi language. Perhaps this should have been their first warning, but Igor Dyatlov, a 23-year-old engineering student, led his group with confidence toward what would become one of the most disturbing mysteries in modern history. What happened in those frozen mountains defies rational explanation, and the evidence left behind suggests something far more sinister than a simple hiking accident. The facts we know are these: 9 people entered the wilderness, 0 returned alive. Their bodies were discovered weeks later in conditions so bizarre and inexplicable that investigators have spent decades trying to piece together the final hours of their lives. But perhaps the most unsettling aspect isn't what we found. It's what we didn't find, and what the evidence suggests about the final moments of terror these young people experienced in the endless Siberian night. The group consisted of 8 men and 2 women, all experienced hikers from the Ural Polytechnical Institute. Igor Dyatlov was the expedition leader, methodical and responsible. Zinaida Kolmogorova was 22, studying radio engineering. Lyudmila Dubinina, 21, was known for her cheerful disposition and love of hiking. Rustem Slobodin, 23, was studying engineering. Yuri Doroshenko, 21, was an economics student. Yuri Krivonishenko, 23, worked as a construction engineer. Nikolai Thibault Brignol, 24, had an unusual surname that reflected his French ancestry. Alexander Kolovatov, 24, was the most experienced hiker in the group. Semyon Zolotaryov, 37, was significantly older than the others and had joined the expedition at the last minute. The 10th member, Yuri Yudin, would become the sole survivor, not because he escaped some terrible fate, but because he turned back early due to illness, a decision that would haunt him for the rest of his life. Their planned route would take them through some of the most remote and unforgiving terrain in the Soviet Union. The weather conditions were harsh, but not unusual for the region. Temperatures regularly dropped to -25°C. But these were experienced hikers who had undertaken similar expeditions before. They were well equipped with proper clothing, food supplies, and camping gear. Their itinerary called for them to reach Mount Otorten and return by February 12th. When they failed to appear, search parties were organized, but the vastness of the Siberian wilderness made finding them like searching for needles in an endless white haystack. The first clues emerged on February 26th when search teams discovered their abandoned tent on the slopes of Kholat Syakhl. What they found defied all logic and experience. The tent had been cut open from the inside, not unzipped or opened normally, but slashed with desperate, frantic cuts. The hikers had fled into the deadly cold wearing only their underwear and socks. Their boots, coats, and essential survival gear remained inside the tent. The scene suggested a panic so absolute that 9 experienced hikers chose almost certain death by exposure over whatever had driven them from their shelter. But there were no signs of struggle, no evidence of an attack, no footprints or tracks other than those of the hikers themselves leading away into the frozen darkness. The footprints told their own disturbing story. They led downhill toward a forest about 1.5 kilometers from the tent. Some prints appeared to be from people wearing only socks or barefoot. Others showed evidence of makeshift foot coverings. The track suggested the group stayed together initially, walking in an orderly manner rather than running in panic. This detail would later puzzle investigators. If they were fleeing in terror, why did they walk calmly through the deadly cold? When you're discovering mysteries that challenge everything we understand about human behavior and survival, you realize how much we still don't know about the world around us. If you're fascinated by these unexplained events and want to explore more cases that defy explanation, Make sure to subscribe to this channel and hit the notification bell, because we're just beginning to uncover the disturbing truth about what happened on that mountain, and the evidence we're about to examine will forever change how you think about this case. The first two bodies were discovered on February 27th near the edge of the forest. Yuri Krivonashenko and Yuri Doroshenko were found beneath a large cedar tree. Both were barefoot and nearly naked. They had apparently tried to climb the cedar, as branches up to 5 meters high were broken off, and there were traces of skin found on the bark between the cedar tree and the tent. Searchers found 3 more bodies. Igor Dyatlov was found in a position suggesting he was trying to return to the tent. Zenaida Kolmogorova was found further up the slope, and Rustem Slobodin was discovered between them. These 3 appeared to have died while attempting to return to their shelter, but the most disturbing discoveries were yet to come. The remaining 4 bodies were not found until May 14th. They were discovered in a ravine about 75 meters from the cedar tree, buried under 4 meters of snow. These bodies presented injuries that transformed the case from a mysterious accident into something far more sinister and inexplicable. Lyudmila Dubinina was missing her tongue, lips, and facial tissue. Nikolai Thibault-Brignol had major skull damage. Alexander Kolovatov had similar injuries. Semyon Zolotaryov had massive chest trauma with multiple broken ribs. The force required to cause these injuries was equivalent to that of a high-speed car accident, but there were no external wounds, no cuts or bruises on the skin. The damage was entirely internal, as if some tremendous pressure had been applied to their bodies from the outside. The autopsy results raised more questions than they answered. The medical examiner noted that the chest injuries would have required a force equivalent to several tons of pressure, yet there were no signs of a struggle, no defensive wounds, no evidence that any of the hikers had fought for their lives. Some of the victims' clothing showed traces of radioactive contamination, but the levels were not high enough to be immediately lethal, and the source of the radiation was never determined. The missing facial tissue from Dubinina's body showed no signs of decomposition or animal predation. It appeared to have been removed by some other means. Official investigators considered numerous possibilities. An avalanche was ruled out because there were no signs of avalanche activity in the area, and an avalanche would not explain why the hikers cut their way out of the tent. Wild animals were considered, but there were no tracks or signs of animal presence, and animals would not cause the specific pattern of internal injuries found on the bodies. Military involvement was suspected by some. The area was relatively close to a military testing site, but no evidence of weapons or explosives was found. The radioactive traces suggested some kind of nuclear involvement, but the levels were inconsistent with any known weapons testing. The most puzzling aspect remained the hikers' behavior. Experienced outdoors enthusiasts knew that leaving shelter without proper clothing in those conditions meant certain death, yet they did exactly that, and they did it in an organized manner, cutting their way out of the tent and walking calmly into the deadly cold. This suggests they faced something they perceived as an even greater threat than freezing to death. But what could be more terrifying than the absolute certainty of death by exposure? Local Mansi people were questioned extensively. They had no involvement in the deaths and were generally friendly toward hikers, but they did speak of strange lights in the sky during that period. Other witnesses reported seeing bright orange orbs moving through the night sky around the time of the incident. These accounts were dismissed by investigators as unreliable, but similar reports came from multiple independent sources, including military personnel at nearby installations. The combination of the unexplained injuries, the radioactive traces, and the reports of strange lights led some to speculate about extraterrestrial involvement. The official investigation concluded in May 1959. The cause of death was listed as a compelling natural force, which explained nothing All case files were classified as secret and locked away for decades. This secrecy only fueled more speculation about government cover-ups and military involvement. When the files were finally released in the 1990s, they contained more questions than answers. Crucial evidence was missing. Photographs were overexposed or showed unexplained light anomalies. Witness statements had been redacted. It became clear that the full truth about what happened on that mountain would never be officially acknowledged. In 2019, Russian authorities reopened the investigation. They concluded that an avalanche was the most likely cause, despite the fact that this theory had been thoroughly debunked decades earlier. The new investigation seemed designed more to provide closure than to uncover truth, but the evidence simply doesn't support their conclusions. An avalanche cannot explain the tent being cut from the inside. It cannot explain the severe internal injuries without external wounds. It cannot explain the radioactive contamination, and it certainly cannot explain why experienced hikers would abandon their shelter and walk to their deaths in the freezing night. More recent theories have suggested infrasound as a possible explanation. Certain weather conditions can create low-frequency sound waves that induce feelings of panic and disorientation. This could theoretically explain why the hikers fled their tent in terror, but it doesn't explain the severe injuries found on 4 of the bodies, nor does it account for the radioactive traces or the missing facial tissue. Infrasound might have been a contributing factor, but it cannot be the complete answer to this enduring mystery. The psychological impact on the families and friends of the victims cannot be understated. They lost loved ones in circumstances so bizarre that even today, decades later, no satisfactory explanation exists. Yuri Yudin, the man who turned back due to illness and thus avoided the fate of his friends, spent years trying to understand what happened. He became convinced that some form of government cover-up was involved. He pointed to inconsistencies in the official reports, missing evidence, and the decades of secrecy surrounding the case. Until his death in 2021, he maintained that the truth about Dyatlov Pass had never been revealed. The case has inspired countless theories ranging from the plausible to the fantastical, secret military tests of new weapons, encounters with indigenous people defending their territory, natural phenomena like ball lightning or electromagnetic anomalies, psychological breakdown induced by unknown factors, and yes, even extraterrestrial intervention. Each theory attempts to explain some aspects of the evidence while failing to account for others. The truth, if it can ever be determined, likely involves a combination of factors that created a perfect storm of terror and confusion on that remote mountainside. What makes the Dyatlov Pass incident so disturbing is not just the mysterious circumstances of the deaths. It's the realization that 9 capable, intelligent people faced something so terrifying that they chose certain death over remaining in their shelter. They made a collective decision that defies all logic and survival instinct. The evidence suggests their final hours were filled with unimaginable fear and suffering. They died alone in the darkness, far from help, knowing that their choice to leave the tent had sealed their fate. The mountain where they died still bears Dyatlov's name. Dyatlov Pass serves as a monument to their unexplained suffering. Hikers still venture there, drawn by the mystery and the tragic story, but locals warn that the mountain remembers what happened there, that some places hold on to the terror and pain of those who died there, and that the dead do not rest easily when their deaths remain unexplained. Perhaps that's just superstition, or perhaps there are some mysteries that are meant to remain unsolved, some truths too terrible for the human mind to fully comprehend, some places where the boundary between the known and unknown becomes dangerously thin. The 9 hikers who set out for Mount Otterten in February 1959 expected to return home with stories of adventure and achievement. Instead, they became part of a mystery that continues to haunt investigators and fascinate the world more than 60 years later. Their final moments remain locked in the frozen silence of that remote mountain, and the truth died with them in the endless Siberian night, leaving behind only questions, theories, and the disturbing knowledge that sometimes, even in our modern world, people can simply vanish into the unknown, taking their secrets with them into the eternal darkness.